Hey guys, good morning, or I know for Colorado people it's good morning, good afternoon for everybody else. I wanted to come here live because today is the big day for the huge. Our cocktail party is tonight where product X is going to be released. We're super excited. We're heading to the pool right now, and then we have a massage today paid for by Lavelle. Today at 3:30. So Chris and I are super excited. So we're gonna get a massage after we lay by the pool for a little bit and maybe go to the beach again. And then we're going to go to the cocktail party. And we will be live there tonight.
August 13th, 2018, 5:27 a.m. Frederick, Colorado. The sun had not yet broken the horizon. Sprinklers clicked across tidy lawns, and porch lights glowed faint against the fading night. On this street, everything looked untouched, ordinary, yet inside one house, silence had replaced every sound of life. Ask yourself this. When you close your eyes at night, how certain are you about the person sleeping beside you? Trust can be a mask. A smile can hide intent. And sometimes the greatest danger doesn't come through a broken window. It rises quietly from the very heart of a home. That morning, one family vanished. A husband stepped forward, calm when chaos should have shattered him. His voice is steady, his face composed. And for those watching, unease began to spread. Because control can be its own kind of confession. What does it take for someone to gamble everything? Their life, their future, their family, for a secret no one else could see? Was it passion? Was it desperation? Or was it something even harder to face? Stay with me. The truth behind that quiet Colorado dawn will challenge everything you thought you knew about loyalty, love, and trust. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop your location in the comments. And ask yourself, could you handle the truth if it lived inside your own home? Shannon Razusek grew up in North Carolina, where life tested her early. She battled health challenges that could have broken her spirit, but instead, they sharpened her resilience. Doctors warned her of limitations, yet she refused to live small. Shannon built herself piece by piece, through determination and faith that better days would come. Friends often described her as strong-willed, outspoken, and fiercely protective of those she loved. To Shannon, life wasn't about waiting for opportunity. It was about creating it, even if she had to fight harder than most to get there. Her ambition carried her into adulthood. She invested herself in work, in self-improvement, and in surrounding herself with people who lifted her up. At one point, she even built her dream home, determined to prove to herself, and to others, that she could rise above every obstacle thrown in her path. But behind that drive was also a longing for stability, for someone who could stand beside her through all of life's challenges. For all her strength, Shannon yearned for a partner she could depend on, someone who would see her value and love her without hesitation. That search would eventually lead her to the man who would change her life forever. Chris Watts was a stark contrast to Shannon in nearly every way. Born in Oklahoma and later raised in North Carolina, he was known as quiet, reserved, the kind of man who blended easily into the background. While Shannon commanded attention with her energy and presence, Chris was content in silence. He found comfort in the mechanical world. Cars, engines, machines that could be fixed with steady hands and patience. Where emotions were complex and unpredictable, engines followed rules. They made sense to him. He didn't need to speak much, because he communicated through the things he built and repaired. People saw him as dependable, easygoing, never confrontational. But that calm exterior came with its own shadows. Chris grew up in a family where his role was often passive. He wasn't the one to argue or make demands. He was the one who adapted. That quietness was mistaken for loyalty, but in truth, it was avoidance. Conflict made him retreat, and instead of facing problems head-on, he buried them beneath silence. For a time, that personality trait seemed harmless. To Shannon, it even appeared comforting. She saw in Chris a steady anchor, someone who wouldn't fight her, someone who could ground her intensity. What she didn't realize was that the very trait that drew her to him would one day play a role in the undoing of everything they built together. Their meeting wasn't one of those epic love stories told through grand gestures. It began in a simple way. Two people introduced through mutual connections, a chance encounter that turned into something lasting. At the time, Shannon was guarded. She had been through struggles and carried wounds that made her cautious about who she let close. But Chris was patient. He didn't overwhelm her with words or demands. Instead, he offered quiet consistency. Slowly, she allowed herself to trust him, to believe that perhaps he was the safe place she had been searching for. Their romance unfolded quickly once she opened the door. Chris was present when she needed him most, showing up when others had let her down. His silence felt dependable, his steady presence reassuring. Shannon described meeting him as a turning point in her life, saying that when she felt broken, he helped her believe in love again. To her, it felt as though fate had placed him in her path, someone who could handle her intensity without trying to change it. And Chris, for his part, seemed drawn to Shannon's drive, her ambition, her fire. Where he was quiet, she was expressive. Where he was hesitant, she was determined. Together, they balanced, at least for a time. The whirlwind romance moved forward with certainty. Marriage soon followed, then the birth of their two daughters, Bella and Celeste. To the outside world, they were building a picture-perfect life. In 2013, they purchased a spacious home in Frederick, Colorado, a symbol of achievement, a place where they believed they could raise their family and grow roots. Shannon's social media accounts overflowed with photos and videos of smiling faces, playful moments, and affirmations of love. She often praised Chris publicly, calling him a wonderful father and husband. To those watching, they appeared solid, enviable, the kind of couple others aspired to be. But behind every curated image was a reality more complicated. Social media offered the polished version of their marriage, not the fractures that grew slowly beneath the surface. Friends saw the highlights: family trips, birthday celebrations, videos of Chris playing with the girls. What they couldn't see were the moments when Shannon felt him pulling away, when his quietness became distant, when she reached for him and found only coldness. Shannon was deeply invested in their family, pouring her energy into creating memories and holding things together. Chris, meanwhile, retreated further into himself, unwilling to voice the discontent that was beginning to take root. In those early years, the differences that once seemed complementary began to reveal themselves as cracks. Shannon's ambition, her drive to succeed in her career and provide for her family, often put her in the spotlight. She thrived in social settings, confident and outspoken. Chris, on the other hand, preferred the background. He wasn't the type to draw attention, and over time, he began to resent how much space Shannon occupied in their shared life. She was always moving forward, chasing goals, while he remained static, struggling to define himself beyond the roles of husband and father. What once felt like balance began to feel like imbalance. Friends noticed subtle changes. Shannon continued to post glowing tributes, but occasionally, her words hinted at a need for reassurance, as though she was trying to remind Chris, and maybe herself, that their love was still intact. When he appeared in her videos, his smile seemed thinner, his responses more restrained. He wasn't outwardly cruel or dismissive, but his silence had grown heavier. He no longer engaged with the same warmth, no longer mirrored her energy. For a woman as intuitive as Shannon, these small withdrawals were not invisible. She felt the gap widening, though she struggled to understand its depth. Foreshadowing lingered in the quiet moments. Shannon once described Chris as her rock, but by 2017, that rock felt less like support and more like distance. He had lost weight, changed his habits, and while some saw it as self-improvement, to Shannon, it felt like he was slipping away from her. She tried to bridge the gap, sending affectionate texts, planning family activities, seeking intimacy, but Chris responded with detachment. His passivity, once a comfort, now became a wall she could not climb. She was fighting for their marriage, but he was already retreating into a silence that would eventually engulf them both. Every marriage faces struggles, but theirs carries a dangerous imbalance. Shannon confronted problems head-on, refusing to let them fester. Chris avoided them at all costs, burying resentment in silence. The more she pushed to reconnect, the further he withdrew. And in that withdrawal, he created space for secrets to grow. By the time the summer of 2018 arrived, Shannon was still fighting for her family, still clinging to the hope that they could overcome the distance. But Chris had already begun to imagine a life where she and their children no longer existed in his future. In 2013, Chris and Shannon Watts carried their hopes across the threshold of a brand new home in Frederick, Colorado. The house was large, modern, and freshly painted, with wide windows that caught the sun in the morning and lit up the rooms at night. To Shannon, it was more than just a purchase. It was a declaration that she had made it past every obstacle that once held her back. She filled the walls with family photos, decorated the rooms with care, and told friends she finally had the place where her children could grow, safe and secure. To neighbors, they looked like the perfect family in the perfect setting, a young couple with two beautiful daughters building a life in a quiet community where everyone waved as they passed. The neighborhood itself mirrored the dream they thought they were living. Children played in cul-de-sacs, bikes leaned against fences, and the hum of lawnmowers filled the air on summer evenings. Bella and Celeste thrived here, running through the yard with squeals of joy, waving shyly at neighbors, and tugging at their parents' hands during afternoon walks. Shannon loved the rhythm of it, the feeling of belonging, the sight of her family inside this storybook picture. For her, this was everything she had fought to achieve. Health challenges, disappointments, and setbacks all felt smaller when she looked at what they had built. But every picture-perfect story hides details the eye can't see. The truth was, the house was not just a home, it was also a weight. A mortgage loomed over them, heavy and unforgiving, and by 2015 the pressure broke through. They filed for bankruptcy, forced to admit the numbers no longer balanced, that the life they were displaying came at a cost they could not sustain. More than $70,000 in debt stretched across credit cards, student loans, and medical bills. To the outside world, little seemed to change. They still smiled for photos, still posted updates, still celebrated milestones. But inside, the financial stress was suffocating. Every bill was a reminder that the foundation beneath their dream was unstable. Shannon refused to surrender to those pressures. She threw herself into work with relentless determination, joining a direct sales company and quickly climbing its ranks. Her days were filled with phone calls, online meetings, and posts meant to inspire and persuade. She shared motivational messages alongside videos of her daughters, blurring the line between her family life and her career. Each sale mattered. Each new recruit mattered. Success meant security, and security meant she could hold her family together. Yet beneath the polished smile and tireless effort, the truth was harder. She was carrying the weight nearly alone, because Chris, though steady at work, was detached from the financial battle. Chris's income from Anadarko Petroleum provided stability, but he never stepped into the role of planner or protector in the way Shannon longed for. His nature was to retreat, to go quiet, to avoid confrontation. While Shannon fought, he folded into routine. Wake up, go to work, come home, play with the girls, sleep. Friends saw his calm demeanor as balance, but Shannon experienced it as absence. She wanted a partner to strategize with, someone to face the storm head-on. Instead, she often felt she was pulling a load meant for two, with Chris fading further into the background each time she reached for him. Silence became his answer, and silence only deepened her loneliness. The tension didn't stop at money. It seeped into family ties, growing sharper as years went on. Shannon and Chris's parents struggled to find common ground. Arguments rose over boundaries, traditions, and respect, but nothing compared to the clash in the summer of 2018. Bella's severe nut allergy required constant vigilance, something Shannon took seriously, guarding her daughter against even the slightest risk. Yet during a visit to North Carolina, Chris's mother offered Bella ice cream containing nuts. To Shannon, it was not a small mistake. It was reckless, dangerous, and deeply disrespectful. Her fury was immediate. She demanded Chris stand up for their daughter and for her. But he didn't. Instead of choosing a side, Chris folded into silence once again. He told himself he was keeping peace, but in truth, his refusal to act cut Shannon deeply. She felt abandoned in a fight that involved her child's safety. To her, it confirmed what she already feared, that Chris would not protect her, that he would not defend their children when it mattered most. The incident, which later became known as Nutgate, left scars that never healed. It wasn't just an argument over ice cream. It was a fracture that ran through the heart of their marriage, widening a gap that already existed. Shannon tried to cover those cracks with the same energy she used to build everything else. Online, she kept the image alive. Photos of birthday parties, family vacations, and affectionate posts praising Chris as a devoted husband and father. She told the world he was her rock, the man she could always rely on. But behind the screen, the reality was harder. The messages she sent him grew more urgent, her tone shifting from affection to worry, from worry to desperation. She noticed the way he turned away in bed, the way his replies grew shorter, the way his eyes looked past her instead of at her. She tried harder, sent more texts, planned more moments. But the harder she pulled, the further he slipped away. To outsiders, the Watts family still looked untouchable. Inside their home, silence was the soundtrack. Chris kept retreating, and Shannon kept fighting to reach him. Financial strain, family conflict, and emotional distance pressed against the walls of their marriage until the facade felt paper-thin. Neighbors saw smiling faces. Shannon felt isolation. Chris gave the world composure. Shannon lived with doubt. And somewhere in that silence, the seeds of tragedy were already settling, though neither of them could see how deep they would grow. Do you think financial stress and family conflict can push someone to a breaking point? Or is that just an excuse? That's the question that lingers when you look back at the life they built in Frederick. Because what looked like the perfect suburban dream was, in truth, a home trembling under the weight of silence, debt, and unspoken resentments. Nicole Kessinger was a woman rebuilding. Intelligent, educated, and self-reliant. She had charted her path in a field where women were still outnumbered. With a degree in environmental science, she secured work in Colorado's oil and gas industry, where every day meant working alongside men in hard hats and steel-toed boots. She wasn't intimidated. She was focused. Friends described her as sharp, motivated, and determined to stand on her own after relationships that had left her cautious. She wanted something lasting, but she also wanted freedom. Freedom from the mistakes of the past, and freedom to choose a partner who would value her independence. By the summer of 2018, Nicole was single and ready for a fresh start. She wasn't chasing drama. She was chasing stability, though she also carried the quiet longing that many feel when life feels unsettled. And then, in the sterile halls of Anadarko Petroleum, she met a man whose demeanor seemed different from the rest. He wasn't loud or flirtatious. He wasn't the type to boast. He was reserved, polite, and soft-spoken. His name was Chris Watts. To Nicole, he looked like a man caught in transition, someone who had one foot in the past and one in the future. When he told her he was separated, moving toward divorce, she believed him. At first, the connection was unremarkable. Small conversations at work, a sense of ease that built slowly. But then the messages began, text by text, until their phones buzzed with constant chatter. Chris confided that his marriage was loveless, that he felt trapped, that he was on the verge of starting over. Nicole listened. She sympathized. She began to imagine a role in his new life. Their meetings moved quickly from casual dinners to hotel rooms, where secrecy gave them cover and intimacy fed their fantasy. What had started as workplace familiarity became a consuming affair. Chris, who had been quiet and unassuming for most of his adult life, began to change. He shed pounds, obsessed over fitness, bought new clothes, and started carrying himself with an energy Shannon hadn't seen in years. At home, Shannon watched his transformation with unease. She praised his weight loss, but she sensed he was no longer changing for her. In secret, it was Nicole who praised him most, telling him how attractive he looked, how alive he seemed, how free he could be. The contrast was striking. At home, Shannon begged him to reconnect. Away from home, Nicole told him he was becoming the man he always wanted to be. Their affair lived in the shadows but left unmistakable traces. Nicole's laptop and phone revealed searches that later shocked investigators. She looked up the most popular wedding dresses of 2018. She browsed tropical vacation spots. She searched phrases like how to prepare for a new relationship and even asked the internet if people hate mistresses. And then, in the most haunting detail, she researched mistresses in high-profile murder cases. Each search added another layer to the fantasy she was entertaining. She wanted to see herself in a future with Chris, yet somewhere in her mind, she also knew that futures built on secrets rarely last without consequence. Chris fed those fantasies with late-night calls, whispered promises, and declarations that he was leaving Shanann. He told Nickel he wanted her, only her, and that soon he would be free. To Nickel, those words mattered. She wasn't looking for an affair that would end in silence. She was looking for the start of something real, something lasting. She pictured herself in white dresses, on beaches, in a life where she no longer had to hide. She wanted freedom and romance, and she believed Chris was giving her both. But while Nickel dreamed forward, Shanann clung tighter. She texted Chris with affection, asked why he seemed so cold, and tried to keep their marriage alive. She organized family trips, posted loving tributes online, told friends she wouldn't give up. To Shanann, this was the fight of her life, the fight for her family, for her children, for the marriage she had invested everything in. To Nickel, it was the opposite, the opening of a new chapter, a chance to start over with a man who had promised to leave it all behind. Two women, both invested in the same man, but in entirely different ways. One holding on with hope, the other reached out with desire. And in the middle stood Chris Watts, divided between preservation and escape. To Shanann, his silence was abandonment. To Nickel, his attention was devotion. To him, it felt like suffocation on one side and freedom on the other. It was never just about an affair. It was about transformation. Chris was no longer the quiet husband in the background of family photos. He was a man reimagining himself in the eyes of another woman. He was someone who believed, for the first time, that he could rewrite his life entirely. And once he believed that, the life he already had, the house, the wife, the daughters, no longer felt like stability. It felt like a cage. And that is where the danger began. Because fantasies can be intoxicating, but they demand sacrifice. And the deeper Chris sank into this secret world, the more he became convinced that sacrifice was the only way forward. Chris Watts had always been described as quiet, almost shy, the kind of man who rarely stood out in a crowd. But by the summer of 2018, something about him was unmistakably different. His once soft frame had been replaced with lean muscle, sculpted through long hours at the gym. He bought new clothes that hugged his body, wore cologne that left a trace in every room, and carried himself with a confidence that startled even those closest to him. Friends and coworkers noticed, and so did Shanann, but the changes went deeper than appearance. This wasn't just a man getting fit. This was a man stepping away from the life he had built and into a new identity. That identity was fueled by Nicole Kessinger, a coworker he met at Anadarko Petroleum. She believed his story, that he was separated, that his marriage was ending, that he was finally free to start over. In her eyes, he was a man emerging from the shadows, shedding an unhappy past and walking toward her. Their conversations were constant, their chemistry undeniable. They went on secret dates, stayed in hotels, and whispered about a future together. Nicole searched for wedding dresses, Googled vacation spots, and even looked up what it meant to be the other woman. For her, Chris represented possibility. For him, she became the spark that turned discontent into obsession. While Shanann spent 5 weeks in North Carolina with her parents, she began to feel the distance more than ever. She was 15 weeks pregnant, caring for Bella and Celeste, and desperate for her husband's affection. Yet when she called, his voice was flat. When she texted, his replies were clipped. She confided in friends that he seemed cold, that he barely touched her, that he was no longer the man she had married. "Something's wrong with Chris," she wrote, her words a mix of fear and pleading. She sensed a wall between them, but she didn't know another woman was on the other side. On video calls, he played the part of the loving father. Bella would press her face to the screen, giggling, telling him she missed him. Celeste's small voice called out for Daddy. Chris smiled, nodded, said the right words, but his eyes betrayed the truth. As soon as the calls ended, he slipped back into his Colorado world with Nicole, planning dinners, talking about apartments, mapping out a future without Shanann or the children. The duplicity was staggering. In one moment, he was the father of 3, in another the man of someone else's dreams, living 2 lives with a precision that made his deception hard to detect. The contrast between these lives only grew sharper. To Shanann, he was detached but still present, a husband she believed she could win back with patience and prayer. To Nicole, he was attentive and alive, telling her he felt free, with her, that he had never known such happiness. Investigators would later uncover his search history, vacation spots, lyrics about starting over, even how much child support might cost after a divorce. Technology captured the truth Shannon could only sense. While she begged for intimacy, he was planning escape. Shannon's instincts gnawed at her. She told her friend, "He's not the Chris I knew. He doesn't want me anymore." Her voice carried both fear and denial, because admitting the truth would mean her family, the family she displayed proudly on social media, was unraveling. She was a fighter, always had been, and she refused to give up on her marriage. Carrying their unborn son, she tried to bridge the gap, to believe that stress or distance explained the change. But the man she was trying to save was already gone, swallowed by the fantasy he was building in secret. And Nickel, unknowingly, was at the center of that fantasy. She imagined love, stability, and a new beginning. He imagined freedom from responsibility, a life unburdened by bills, children, and expectations. To her, he was a man in transition. To himself, he was a man reborn. But in reality, he was neither. He was still married, still a father, still bound by promises he no longer valued. The double life could not last, and the pressure of it pressed harder with each passing day. This was more than a physical transformation. It was the slow death of conscience. Chris had begun to see his real life not as a blessing, but as a weight. Each text from Shannon, each giggle from his daughters, each reminder of his responsibilities seemed to push him further into the arms of the fantasy. And in that place of desire, deception, and obsession, something dark took root. Can a fantasy blind someone so completely that reality becomes disposable? That is the question this chapter leaves us with. Chris Watts was once seen as ordinary, a quiet man, a father, a husband mowing the lawn while his daughters played in the yard. But under the surface, fantasy consumed him, reshaping his body, hardening his heart, and turning the people who loved him into obstacles. This was no longer just a man chasing attention. It was a man preparing to erase everything that tethered him to reality. In the summer of 2018, Shannon Watts packed her bags and flew to North Carolina with her two daughters. On the surface, it was a chance for Bella and Celeste to spend time with their grandparents. But for Shannon, it was also an escape. She was pregnant with her third child, and she carried more than just the weight of new life. She carried the unbearable knowledge that something inside her marriage was breaking. From the very beginning of the trip, she felt the coldness through the phone. Chris was distant. Calls were short, replies delayed, and his tone was stripped of the warmth that once defined him. She confided in her close friend, saying, "He doesn't want to touch me. He's not the Chris I married." She told her parents she felt him slipping away, though she didn't know how to stop it. While her daughters played in the living room, she sat in the corner of her parents' house, staring at her phone, waiting for a message that rarely came. She texted Chris directly, pleading for honesty. "I don't know how you fell out of love with me in 5 weeks," she wrote. In another message, she confessed, "I keep trying to fix things, and you don't care." Her words carried the ache of a woman desperate to hold her family together, but his responses were short, lifeless. "I'm tired," he would write. Or simply, "I don't know." The dismissiveness cut deeper than any argument could. Silence was his weapon, and Shannon felt it sting every day of that long trip. The North Carolina stay was supposed to bring comfort, but it brought more conflict. During a visit to the Watts family home, tensions flared between Shannon and her mother-in-law, Cindy, over a food allergy incident involving Celeste. Shannon left the encounter humiliated and hurt, telling friends that Chris never defended her. Instead of standing by his wife, he retreated, growing colder, as if he wanted to be anywhere but with her. This isolation left her feeling abandoned, not just by her husband, but by the family she had married into. By the time Shannon returned to Colorado, she was determined to save her marriage. She suggested counseling. She arranged a trip to Aspen, hoping that new scenery would spark old feelings. But nothing worked. Chris was a body without a heart, a man who smiled on command but looked through her as though she wasn't there. In texts to her friends, Shannon admitted that she felt like a stranger in her own home. She described lying in bed next to him and feeling utterly alone. The house was quiet, but the silence was louder than words. Her work trip to Arizona in early August was the breaking point. Surrounded by colleagues, She tried to focus on presentations and business meetings, but her heart was somewhere else. She texted Chris endlessly, asking if he missed her, asking if he still wanted her. He barely replied. Her friends noticed her tears, the way she tried to hide her pain behind a professional smile. One friend later recalled that Shannon was terrified her marriage was falling apart and that Chris no longer wanted the baby she carried. "I feel like he doesn't want me anymore," she told them, her voice heavy with despair. On the night of August 12th, Shannon boarded a late flight back to Denver. She was exhausted, physically from travel, emotionally from weeks of anxiety. At 1:48 a.m., a friend dropped her off at her home in Frederick. A neighbor's doorbell camera captured the final image of Shannon alive, dragging her suitcase across the driveway, heels clicking against the pavement, her silhouette moving slowly in the darkness. She paused for a moment, adjusting her bag, then disappeared inside. What happened next would never be captured on camera. But what we know is that inside that house, Chris was waiting. He was calm, unnaturally calm, the kind of calm that hides something sinister. There was no explosion, no screaming match, no visible storm. There was only silence. Shannon, worn down from her trip, likely hoped for sleep and maybe, just maybe, for her husband's arms around her. Instead, she walked into a stillness that felt rehearsed. The air in the house was heavy, suffocating, as though it knew what she could not, that these were her final hours. The contrast was haunting. Shannon entered the home weary but still fighting for her family. Chris stood inside detached, his mind no longer in the life he had built but in the fantasy he had chosen. She was looking for comfort. He was preparing for destruction. She carried exhaustion, pregnancy, and hope. He carried deception, indifference, and deadly intent. Their paths crossed in that living room, not as husband and wife, but as victim and predator. In hindsight, the signs were everywhere. The texts are filled with longing, the unanswered questions, the tears she hid from friends in hotel rooms, and the words she typed late at night. "I feel so alone." Shannon sensed the truth, that her husband was gone to her in every way that mattered, but she never imagined just how far he was willing to go. The suitcase in the driveway, the quiet return, the eerie calm inside the house. These details live in haunting memory because they foreshadow what was to come. This was not just Shannon's final night. It was the final night for an entire family. And as the door closed behind her, silence settled over the Watts home, a silence that would soon be broken by acts too monstrous to comprehend. Shannon's return should have been the beginning of peace, but it became the start of an unspeakable ending. She had fought for her marriage with words, with love, with faith, but against her husband's duplicity, she stood no chance. Her texts now read like cries from the edge of tragedy. Her walk up the driveway, captured by a camera in the dead of night, is now remembered as a woman's last steps into betrayal. And Chris's calm, so eerie in retrospect, was not the quiet of a man at peace, but the quiet of a man who had already chosen death over life, fantasy over reality, and himself over everything else. The neighborhood was asleep, but inside the Watts home, everything was about to change. Shannon had returned from her business trip only hours earlier. She was exhausted, 15 weeks pregnant, and still holding on to a fragile hope that she and Chris might repair what was broken. According to his later confession, she confronted him in their bedroom. She asked if he still loved her. She asked if he wanted their marriage, if he wanted their baby. Her texts from the days before revealed the same questions in digital ink. "I don't know how you fell out of love with me in 5 weeks. I keep trying to fix things, and you don't care." This was not a sudden storm. It was the breaking point of weeks of silence and rejection. Chris claimed he told her he no longer loved her, that he felt nothing, that the marriage was over. For Shannon, already vulnerable and weary, those words were devastating. But she fought back. She argued. She defended her family. She demanded honesty. In that moment, instead of walking away, Chris made a choice that would shock the world. He climbed on top of her and wrapped his hands around her neck. Shannon struggled, tried to push him away, but he held firm. For minutes, he squeezed until her body went still. Autopsy reports later confirmed strangulation as the cause of death. She was pregnant with their son, Nico, who died with her in silence. Shannon had bruises on her neck and shoulders consistent with a prolonged struggle. Her unborn child was intact, but lifeless, a reminder of the potential erased that morning. Detectives later said the brutality of killing a pregnant woman added a level of cruelty that made this case unforgettable. But the horror did not end there. Bella, only 4 years old, and Celeste, just 3, stirred from their sleep. They saw their father dragging a sheet down the stairs, their mother's body hidden inside. Bella asked the question investigators would never forget. "What's wrong with Mommy?" Chris told her she was just sleeping. The girls, frightened but trusting, believed the lie. He loaded them into the back seat of his work truck, still in their pajamas, their small voices asking questions he would not answer. Alongside them, concealed in the shadows, lay their murdered mother. The drive east to the Survey 319 oil site lasted nearly an hour. GPS records later confirmed the route. Steady, direct, without hesitation. Investigators would later marvel at the coldness of that journey. Chris drove in silence, his hands steady on the wheel, his eyes fixed on the road, as his daughters sat feet away from their dead mother. He had time to stop. He had time to reconsider. But every mile carried him closer to a decision he had already made. Forensic analysis of the truck revealed disturbing evidence. Tufts of hair were later recovered, consistent with the struggle that occurred inside. A faint odor of decomposition was noted by technicians. These details, small but significant, painted the picture of a drive that was anything but ordinary. The remote oil site was quiet, nothing but the sound of wind moving across the fields and the hum of equipment. Chris parked the truck near 2 massive oil tanks. His first act was to drag Shanann's body across the dirt and begin digging a shallow grave. The earth was dry, hard, and resistant. He dug just deep enough to conceal her, barely 2 feet down. He laid her inside, covered her with soil, and turned back to the truck. Inside waited his daughters. Celeste was the first. He covered her small face with a blanket and pressed down until she no longer moved. She was 3 years old, still full of babyish laughter, still calling him daddy. He carried her body to the top of the oil tank, forced her through an 8-inch opening, and dropped her inside. The tank swallowed her whole, her body preserved in crude oil. Then came Bella. At 4, she understood more. She had watched what happened to her sister. She had seen her father bury her mother. She knew what was coming. Chris later admitted that she pleaded with him. "Daddy, no." Those were her last words. He smothered her as she fought back, leaving injuries that examiners later described as defensive. Bella's small body, too, was carried up the stairs of the tank and lowered inside. Her resistance, though futile, marked her as a child who fought to the very end. Each opening was only 8 inches wide. Forensic teams later described the difficulty of placing the girls inside. The decision was not impulsive. It required deliberation and force. Autopsies confirmed both girls died by smothering. Their bodies, submerged in oil, were recovered days later in conditions that horrified even seasoned investigators. With his daughters discarded in separate tanks and Shannon buried shallow in the dirt, Chris returned to his truck. By 7:30 a.m., he was on the road again, heading to work as though nothing had happened. Later that morning, co-workers would recall him being calm, even casual, performing routine tasks while his family lay hidden at the site. That dissonance, the ability to act normal while concealing such horror, remains one of the most chilling aspects of the case. It is impossible to comprehend the mindset required to carry out these acts. Chris did not stop after Shannon. He did not stop after Celeste. He ignored Bella's pleas. Each decision was deliberate, each act chosen, not in blind panic, but in a chilling sequence of control. Psychologists who later examined the case argued that this was not desperation. It was the calculated erasure of a family standing in the way of his fantasy life. What was going through his mind as he tightened his grip? Was this desperation or choice? The evidence points to choice. The GPS data, the sequence of events, the deliberate concealment all speak to a man who knew exactly what he was doing. He had moments to turn back. He had chances to stop. Yet he pressed forward, step by step, until the family he once smiled beside in photos was gone. August 13th began like any other morning in Frederick, Colorado. But by sunrise, a mother, her 2 daughters, and an unborn son were gone. Their lives were stolen not by strangers, not by chance, but by the man who should have been their protector. Investigators later said the image that haunted them most was not the grave or the oil tanks, but Bella's last words. "Daddy, no." Words that revealed she saw the truth in those final moments. That the greatest danger to her family had been inside their home all along. Shannon Watts was expected at a doctor's appointment that morning. An appointment she had been looking forward to because it meant hearing her unborn son's heartbeat again. When she did not arrive, her friend Nicole Atkinson grew uneasy. Nicole had dropped Shannon off just hours earlier, helping her with her suitcase after the late-night flight. By mid-morning, Nicole's calls went unanswered, and her texts showed no reply. Shannon was reliable, meticulous, and always connected to her phone. Silence from her was not just unusual. It was unthinkable. Nicole drove to the Watts home. She rang the bell, knocked on the door, and even peered through the glass. No movement, no sound. The blinds were drawn, the driveway quiet, the house unnaturally still. Nicole knew Shannon would never ignore an important medical appointment, especially during a high-risk pregnancy. Her worry turned into urgency. She called Chris, pressing him for answers, but his responses were flat and vague. He said Shannon had taken the girls to a friend's house. Nicole didn't believe him. She knew Shannon well enough to know the story made no sense. Nicole called the Frederick Police Department and requested a welfare check. She stayed outside the house until officers arrived, refusing to leave until someone listened. Detectives later noted that without Nicole's persistence, the case might have begun much later. Her refusal to accept Chris's explanation and her insistence on immediate police action became the turning point that brought authorities to the door that afternoon. When Chris finally arrived, officers were waiting. Nicole demanded he open the door. His demeanor struck them immediately, stiff, detached, as if he were more inconvenienced than alarmed. Inside, the search was brief but revealing. Shannon's purse sat on a chair, her phone lay on the couch, her keys and wallet were untouched, and her wedding ring had been left on the nightstand. Most disturbing, her lupus medication was still in its container. For investigators, these discoveries were more than clues. They were red flags that screamed Shannon had not left willingly. The house itself was quiet, unnervingly so. Officers later recalled the tension in the air, the sense that something was missing, though nothing looked broken. No signs of forced entry, no scattered belongings, no visible struggle. Yet the essentials of Shannon's life remained in plain sight, as if she had vanished into thin air. For detectives, that silence was louder than any broken door or shattered glass. Chris stayed near the officers, arms crossed tightly over his chest. He did not ask them what they had found, nor did he appear frantic to search rooms himself. He repeated that Shannon had gone on a playdate, though he could not name which friend she visited. Officers later noted he seemed focused on controlling his image rather than helping with the search. Nicole Atkinson, who knew Shannon's routines intimately, grew more suspicious with each passing minute. In her eyes, Chris looked less like a worried husband and more like a man rehearsing answers. That evening, Chris stepped in front of cameras. He stood on his porch, rocking back and forth on his feet, folding and unfolding his arms. His voice was calm, his eyes shifting. "Shannon, Bella, Celeste. If you're out there, just come back," he said, glancing down instead of into the camera. Viewers watching the interview noticed the same oddness the officers had sensed. His words sounded practiced, his tone too even. The home behind him felt emptier by the second, and the man asking for his family's return seemed strangely untouched by panic. Not far away, one neighbor was watching closely. He had surveillance cameras pointed toward the Watts driveway, and he offered police a recording. The footage showed Chris backing his truck into the garage early that morning, an unusual move that caught the neighbor's attention. As the video played in the living room, Chris shifted uncomfortably, speaking over the sound, insisting it was just part of his routine. The neighbor wasn't convinced. He told police, "He's not acting right. He's not himself." The officer present later described the moment as striking. The neighbor recognized something was off, and Chris's nervous chatter only made it worse. By nightfall, the red flags were undeniable. Shannon's phone, the lifeline she used for work and family, was found silent. Her car, still in the garage, contained both children's car seats, making it impossible she had taken them anywhere. Her medication was untouched, a detail detectives marked as critical because Shannon's lupus required consistent treatment. Every piece of evidence suggested she had never left the house, and every explanation Chris gave seemed thinner under scrutiny. This was no longer just a missing person report. It was the early unraveling of a murder investigation. Shanann's friends insisted she would never run. Her parents knew she would never abandon her daughters. And the evidence inside the house, the purse, the phone, the ring, told the same story. But perhaps most damning of all was the behavior of the man in front of the cameras. Calm when he should have been frantic. Detached when he should have been desperate. Focused on appearances when he should have been tearing the world apart to find his family. The search for Shanann began as a welfare check, but within hours, the focus shifted. The house was too orderly, the essentials too perfectly in place, the husband too composed. To the outside world, it seemed as though a mother and her children had vanished. To those who knew her best, it was obvious Shanann had never left. Her phone sat lifeless on the couch. Her purse remained by the chair, and the wedding ring she once wore proudly lay abandoned on a nightstand, a silent testimony that her disappearance was not by choice, but by force. 2 days after Shanann and the children were reported missing, investigators turned their attention to a name that had been quietly circling in the background: Nicole Kessinger. She was the woman Chris Watts had been seeing, the woman he told friends and co-workers he couldn't stop thinking about, and the woman who believed she was starting a new life with a man on the verge of divorce. When detectives contacted her, she didn't hesitate. She brought in her phone, opened her call logs, and sat across from investigators in shock. Her interviews were long and intense. She told police that Chris had assured her he was separated, that he and Shanann were ending things, that the house was up for sale, and custody arrangements were being discussed. He spoke of a future with her, quiet evenings, vacations, even the possibility of children one day. She admitted she believed him. "I thought he was at the end of his marriage," she said, her voice trembling. "I never thought for a minute that he was capable of this." Detectives pulled thousands of records from her phone. In July and August 2018, the two exchanged well over 1,000 messages. They called each other late at night, sometimes for more than 2 hours. The week before Shanann's murder, they logged nearly 40 phone calls. Investigators later said the overlap was striking. While Shanann texted her husband pleading, "I don't know how you fell out of love with me," he was simultaneously whispering to Nicole about apartment listings and weekend getaways. The double life was laid bare in digital footprints. When asked if she knew Shanann was pregnant, Nicole shook her head. She had learned that detail from the news. She said Chris told her his wife was out of the picture and that the marriage was over in all but name. She believed him. To prove her sincerity, she unlocked her phone and handed it over without resistance. Detectives noted her cooperation, but the evidence also showed contradictions. She had searched Shanann's name online. She had Googled Amber Fry, the mistress of Scott Peterson. She had typed in questions about marrying your mistress and how much child support someone has to pay. These searches, when revealed, painted her not only as a deceived woman, but as someone who was curious about her role in a story that was still unfolding. The betrayal she felt became clear in her interviews. She told police she watched Chris's porch interview on television, saw him stand calmly in front of cameras, and realized she had been lied to about everything. She was horrified. "I didn't know what to think," she said. "The man on the screen wasn't the man I thought I knew." She broke off contact immediately, telling detectives she wanted no part of him again. In her mind, she had been manipulated, strung along by a man willing to erase his family to live a fantasy. Yet the digital trail showed that she, too, had been building that fantasy alongside him, even if she didn't know the price that would be paid. When Nicole's name became public, the backlash was merciless. She was branded the Mistress in headlines across the country. Social media users dissected her every move, her searches, her voice in interviews, even her appearance. She was compared endlessly to Amber Fry, the other woman in the Peterson case. Strangers accused her of looking away from the truth, of ignoring the red flags, of being complicit by silence. Conspiracy theories spread online that she knew more than she admitted, that she had pressured Chris to act, though investigators never found evidence of such involvement. The weight of that judgment forced her into hiding. She vanished from public life, changed her name, and retreated from view. Unlike Chris, she faced no criminal charges, but she faced a lifetime sentence of suspicion. To many, she was not just a woman who dated the wrong man. She was the face of temptation in a story about betrayal and murder. Nichols' role remains a puzzle. On one hand, she was deceived by a man who hid his marriage behind half-truths and lies. On the other, her internet searches, her curiosity about Shanann, and her willingness to believe Chris's narrative suggest she saw shadows and chose not to shine a light on them. She insists she never knew, and perhaps that is true. But the evidence shows she was, at the very least, standing close enough to the fire to feel its heat. So the question lingers for us. Was Nichol naive and manipulated, or did she ignore the red flags that might have saved 3 lives and an unborn child? Was she another victim of Chris's lies, or did her silence help feed his fantasy until it became unstoppable? Nichol Kessinger did not wield the weapon. She did not strangle Shanann or smother Bella and Celeste. Yet her presence in Chris's life became central to understanding his motive. Her cooperation gave detectives clarity. Her betrayal by Chris left her shattered, and the public's judgment branded her forever as the Mistress. In 1 week, she went from dreaming of a future with a man she believed was free to being tied for life to one of the most notorious family murders in American history. And as the case moves forward, her shadow lingers, forcing us to ask where deception ends and responsibility begins. Chris Watts walked into the interrogation room wearing a t-shirt and shorts, his posture stiff, his face composed. The room itself was small and stark. White walls, a table, 2 chairs, and a camera fixed in the corner. Detectives had spoken with him twice already, but this time was different. The evidence was stacking higher, and the patience of investigators was wearing thin. They needed truth, and they were prepared to break through the calm mask he had worn since the first day Shanann was reported missing. Chris agreed to take a polygraph test. He told the examiner confidently that he had nothing to hide. The questions were simple. Did he know where his family was? Did he harm Shanann? Did he harm the girls? His answers were steady denials. Yet the machine betrayed him. The results came back within minutes, showing deception so clear that the examiner told him bluntly, "You did not pass. Not even close." At that moment, the facade of control cracked. His lips tightened, his arms folded tighter, and his breathing quickened. Detectives seized the opportunity. They leaned in, presenting him with contradictions in his story. They reminded him of the surveillance footage, the missing person phone, the silence that surrounded his version of events. They spoke of Shanann's parents, Bella and Celeste, of the family who deserved answers. Chris shifted in his chair, staring at the table. The room grew heavier as the silence stretched. And then he asked for his father. Detectives brought in Ronnie Watts, Chris's father, who had flown in from North Carolina. The father sat across from his son, confused and frightened. It was in that moment, alone with his father, the cameras still rolling, that Chris whispered his first partial confession. He said Shanann had strangled the girls, and that he had killed her in rage to stop her. It was a shocking lie, one that investigators later described as cruel beyond measure, because it placed the blame on the woman who could no longer defend herself. Chris claimed he had seen Shanann over their daughters' beds, that he had reacted in horror, that his hands went to her throat in blind fury. But detectives knew the evidence didn't match. They had already seen the neighbor's video showing Chris loading the truck with a sheet-wrapped body while the children were still alive. They knew Shanann had no history of violence, and that her texts revealed a mother desperate to protect her children, not harm them. The lie collapsed under the weight of the evidence, but it revealed something essential: Chris's willingness to sacrifice Shanann's memory to save himself. Under mounting pressure, Chris's voice fell into halting admissions. He confessed to strangling Shanann in their bedroom after she confronted him about the affair. He described loading her body into the truck, with Bella and Celeste watching in confusion. He admitted to driving them all to the oil site, burying Shanann in a shallow grave, and then smothering his daughters one by one. His words were clinical, delivered without tears, as though he were describing someone else's actions. Detectives sat in silence, letting the weight of his confession fill the room. Within hours of that interview, search teams were dispatched to the Survey 319 oil site.
For the first time, we are hearing Chris Watts confess to murdering his wife.
I just felt such anger that Nothing. I didn't feel anything.
The father of two, seen here with his father in a police interrogation room, blaming the death of the couple's two daughters on his wife, Shannon Watts.
Most of them took her. That's strange.
There, they recovered Shanann's body from the dirt, Nico still inside her womb, and later pulled Bella and Celeste from the oil tanks. The grisly recovery confirmed Chris's account and left investigators shaken. One officer later admitted that the image of pulling small bodies from industrial tanks was something he would never forget. Chris's confession revealed more than guilt. It revealed the hollow bargain he had made. In chasing an affair, he had traded his family for a fantasy. He believed that by erasing Shanann, Bella, and Celeste, he could start fresh with Nickel, free of responsibility and burden. But the deal was rotten from the start. He did not find freedom. He found a prison cell. He did not find love. He found isolation. He did not find peace. He found his name forever linked to betrayal and slaughter. In the end, the deal with the devil cost him everything and gave him nothing. This is the chilling truth of his confession. Chris Watts did not act out of sudden rage or uncontrollable madness. He acted with calculation, with intent, with a cold willingness to barter life for lust, innocence for escape. He blamed Shanann first, and then admitted the horror was his alone. His emptiness was not the emptiness of a man who lost control, but of a man who had chosen to destroy the very people who trusted him most. So we are left to ask, what kind of void lives inside a man who can strangle his wife, smother his daughters, and then stand on his porch asking them to come home? What kind of emptiness convinces him that fantasy is worth more than family, that lust is worth more than love, that lies are worth more than life? These questions will never have satisfying answers, but they force us to confront the terrifying truth that sometimes the devil we speak of is not a shadowy figure in the dark. Sometimes it is a man sitting in his own living room, smiling for the cameras, while hiding the most unspeakable crime in his heart. The confession was not a moment of redemption. It was the end of lies, the stripping away of excuses, and the confirmation of horror. Chris Watts thought he could build a new life by burying the old one, but the truth clawed its way back through soil and oil and silence. Within hours of his words, detectives stood in the dirt fields of Survey 319, pulling a mother from a shallow grave and lifting her daughters from crude oil. The deal with the devil left nothing but loss, and the echoes of Bella's final plea, "Daddy, no," will forever remind us of the price of his choice. Chris Watts stood before the court, shackled at the wrists, his orange jumpsuit a stark reminder of how far he had fallen. The judge read the charges one by one, and with each, Chris responded in the same flat tone. Guilty. He admitted to killing Shanann. Guilty. He admitted to killing Bella. Guilty. He admitted to killing Celeste and unborn baby Nico. His words came quietly, without emotion, as though he were reading a grocery list instead of acknowledging the destruction of his entire family. Observers noted how detached he seemed, how little his voice carried, and how different it was from the trembling, grief-stricken voices that would soon fill the room. The guilty plea avoided the death penalty. Prosecutors explained that Shanann's family had been consulted, and they had agreed that sparing Chris's life would prevent a long and painful trial. For them, closure mattered more than execution. But for those sitting in the gallery, hearing him speak the word guilty again and again without flinching was almost unbearable. The man who once smiled in family photographs now admitted to unimaginable crimes, and he did so without shedding a single tear. 2 weeks later, the courtroom was packed. Friends, relatives, reporters, and strangers sat side by side, waiting for the final judgment. The atmosphere was heavy, almost suffocating, as everyone turned to face the man who had become infamous across the world. Before the judge could speak, the family had their turn. This was their moment to confront Chris Watts directly, to put their grief into words, and to remind the world who Shanann, Bella, Cece, and Nico really were. Shanann's father, Frank Razusek, was the first to stand. His voice shook as he faced the man once welcomed into their home. "You heartlessly took my family from me," he said. "I trusted you to take care of them, not to kill them. You took away my daughter, my grandchildren, and the son she was carrying. We loved you like a son, and this is how you repay us." The silence in the room deepened as his words cut through, each sentence breaking under the weight of sorrow. Then came Shanann's mother, Sandy. Her pain was visible, yet her voice carried remarkable strength. She spoke of Shanann's laughter, her determination, her devotion to her children. She remembered Bella's sweet songs, Cece's boundless energy, and Shanann's joy in expecting baby Nico. Turning to Chris, she said, "I didn't want death for you because that's not what Shannon would have wanted. But I want you to know I will never understand how you could do this. We loved you, and you betrayed us all." Her words held both grief and a kind of mercy. Mercy he never extended to the family she had raised. Shanann's brother, Frankie, also spoke. He stared at Chris with a mix of fury and disbelief. He told the court how his sister had always protected him when they were children, how she had been his biggest supporter. "You took away my whole family," he said. "You don't know what love is. You don't know what family means. And you'll spend the rest of your life alone, thinking about what you did." His words were raw, unfiltered, and filled with anger that echoed what so many in the room felt. When the family finished, prosecutors rose to speak. They laid out the facts of the case with cold precision. Shannon had been strangled in her own bedroom. Bella and Cece had been smothered, their small hands and voices silenced as they fought for air. Their bodies had been hidden in crude oil, and their mother buried in a shallow grave. The prosecutor described the acts as the most inhumane and vicious crimes I have ever seen in my career. He told the judge that Chris had not only murdered but desecrated the bodies of those who trusted him most. The words hung in the air like a weight too heavy to bear. Finally, it was the judge's turn. He looked at Chris with visible disgust and said, "This is perhaps the most inhumane and cold-blooded crime I have handled in my entire career." He spoke of betrayal, of innocence destroyed, of trust annihilated. Then he began to read the sentence. 1 life sentence for Shannon, a second for Bella, a third for Celeste, a fourth for unborn Nico. Each sentence stacked on top of the last, each one without the possibility of parole. Added to these were additional years for tampering with the bodies and for unlawful termination of pregnancy. The total was a punishment so severe it guaranteed Chris Watts would die behind bars. As the words echoed through the room, Shanann's family clutched one another. Some cried, others sat frozen, their faces etched with both sorrow and relief. The sound of papers shuffling, reporters scribbling, and the gavel striking punctuated the finality of it all. Chris sat motionless, staring forward, his expression blank. He showed no tears, no visible remorse, no acknowledgement of the family's pleas. He had spoken only once to confirm his plea, and now he sat as a prisoner, stripped of the roles of husband, father, and son-in-law. Chris Watts was sentenced to life, but prison bars were not his only cage. His true prison was the life he destroyed, the images he could never escape, the memories of his daughter's final words and Shanann's final fight. Each day behind concrete walls would be haunted by the faces of the family he erased. He had chosen fantasy over reality, lust over love, and control over compassion. And the price of that choice was endless confinement, both physical and psychological, with no escape and no redemption. The courtroom provided justice in the legal sense, but it could never restore what had been lost. Shanann's voice will never again be heard in her parents' home. Bella's laughter will never again echo in a playground. Cece's energy will never again fill a room. Baby Nico will never draw his first breath. What remained was silence, broken only by the final sound of the gavel striking down. Chris Watts left the courtroom shackled, escorted by guards, the doors closing behind him with a finality as permanent as the sentence he carried. 5 life sentences without parole, his permanent prison within prison, the only fitting end to a story of betrayal, fantasy, and unimaginable loss. After the sentencing, Frederick, Colorado, tried to return to quiet, but grief lingered on every street. Vigils were held where candles lined sidewalks and posters of Shannon, Bella, Cece, and unborn baby Nico glowed in the night. At her funeral, a video montage played. Clips Shannon had posted online of Bella singing her sweet songs, of Cece running with uncontainable energy, of Shannon herself laughing while holding her girls close. Friends described her as a fighter, a woman who battled lupus but never surrendered her smile, a mother who worked tirelessly to give her children stability and joy. Her co-workers recalled her determination, how she built a career while raising a family, and how she never let setbacks define her. Family members remembered the small rituals, decorating the house for every holiday, recording milestones, filling her home with music and light. For her parents, Frank and Sandy, the funeral was not an ending but a vow. They promised to protect her memory, to speak against lies, and to remind the world that Shanann was more than the crime that took her. She was a devoted mother, a loving daughter, and a woman who deserved to live. Across the country, strangers who never met Shanann lit candles in her honor. Messages poured onto social media from mothers who said they saw themselves in her struggles and admired her strength. Her videos, once casual updates for friends, became symbols of her devotion, watched by millions searching for the humanity behind the headlines. Shanann's name, once spoken only in private circles, became public testimony of resilience. Her legacy was not defined by the man who ended her life, but by the love she poured into it. But while Shanann's memory was elevated, Nicole Kessinger's fate turned into exile. When her identity was revealed, she became a lightning rod for rage. Headlines branded her the Mistress. Online forums compared her to Amber Frey, the Mistress in the Scott Peterson case, and dissected her every action. News outlets reported her internet searches. Can cops trace text messages? Amber Frey, marrying your mistress. These details, stripped of context, fueled conspiracy theories that she knew more than she admitted. The backlash was relentless. Strangers harassed her, calling her complicit, accusing her of pressuring Chris. She applied for name changes, attempting to disappear, but the internet never stopped searching for her. Investigators found no evidence she had knowledge of the murders, yet she could never prove her innocence in the court of public opinion. She faced no bars, but she lived under a sentence of suspicion, an identity erased, a reputation forever tainted, a future defined by whispers. Nicole vanished from view, leaving behind only questions about what she saw, what she ignored, and what role she truly played in Chris's fantasy. For Chris, life behind bars became a cage within a cage. He was transferred to a Wisconsin prison for his safety, isolated from other inmates who saw him as a target. His days fell into rigid routine: breakfast at dawn, head counts, work assignments, and long hours locked in a cell. Guards described him as quiet, withdrawn, keeping to himself. He studied the Bible, wrote letters to female admirers, and occasionally granted interviews where he spoke of finding God. But his words often carried excuses. He said he felt trapped, that he made a mistake, that he didn't know how to escape his life. Psychologists call this minimization, the language of someone unwilling to bear full responsibility. In one letter, he admitted Bella's final words still echo in his head, and that Cecil's cries visit him in dreams. Yet he rarely spoke of Shanann with compassion, often shifting the blame towards circumstance rather than his own choices. Fellow inmates described him as an outcast. Never respected, never feared, simply ignored. Even among killers, he was seen as something worse, a father who betrayed his own children. His true prison was not just the cell, but the unending replay of memory, a punishment that no walls could contain. Outside prison walls, the world continued to wrestle with his story. Documentaries revisited the case, playing Shanann's last recorded steps, Chris's porch interview, and the chilling details of the oil site. Each retelling reignited debate. Was he a monster from the start, or a coward who let selfishness consume him? Nicole remained a polarizing figure, some insisting she was deceived, others convinced she ignored the red flags. Shanann's family continued to defend her honor, reminding audiences that behind the headlines was a mother who loved fiercely and lived with purpose. Public judgment did not rest solely on Chris. It fell on society itself, forcing people to confront uncomfortable truths. That evil can hide behind a smile, that danger can wear the mask of ordinary, and that betrayal often begins long before the final act. The Watts case became not just a story of murder, but a mirror reflecting our fears about family, trust, and the fragile boundaries between fantasy and reality. The aftermath of this tragedy is not only measured in prison years or news coverage. It is carried in the silence of Shanann's parents' home, in the absence of Bella's songs, in the stillness where Cece's energy once filled a room. It is carried out in Nicole's disappearance, her life rewritten under suspicion. And it is carried in Chris's isolation, where the man who once dreamed of freedom now wakes each day to walls he built with his own hands. So the question lingers. Do you believe someone like Chris Watts can ever feel true remorse? Can a man who traded love, life, and innocence for lust and fantasy ever bear the full weight of his crimes? Or are his hollow words, his careful excuses, his silence in the courtroom proof that true remorse will forever elude him? Shanann's legacy is love. Nicole's fate is exile. Chris's destiny is silence. And the public's role is to remember, to ask the hard questions, and to refuse to let the lives of Bella, Cece, Nico, and Shanann be overshadowed by the man who took them away. The case of Chris Watts remains a chilling reminder that behind every smile there can be secrets, and that sometimes the greatest danger comes not from strangers, but from the person standing in your own home. When we speak of a deal with the devil, we often imagine fire and shadow, some mythical pact sealed in darkness. But in this story, the devil was not a figure waiting in the night. The bargain was Chris Watts's own choice, made quietly in his heart, to destroy what was real in order to chase what was temporary. He bartered a devoted wife and 3 children for a fantasy built on secrecy, lust, and the promise of escape. His devil was not supernatural. It was the emptiness inside him that convinced him lies could erase love, and that silence could bury truth. This bargain was never written in contracts or spoken aloud. It was written in the way he detached from Shanann's messages, in the way he folded his arms on that porch interview, in the way he whispered promises to Nicole while planning a future without the family who bore his name. The deal was the choice to value illusion more than life itself, and the cost was irreversible. The Watts case reminds us that deception rarely begins with violence. It begins with secrecy, hidden texts, unanswered calls, and quiet rationalizations. Chris told Nicole that his marriage was over, told Shanann that he was simply tired, and told himself that he could manage both lives without consequence. Each lie demanded another, and the weight of those lies grew until there was no escape but destruction. Shanann sensed the change. On her last trip to North Carolina, she texted him desperately, "I don't know how you fell out of love with me." She felt his distance, but she did not know the full truth, that he was building another life in whispers and late-night phone calls. Lies, when fed, turned truth into an enemy. And when truth became a threat, Chris silenced it in the most devastating way possible, by silencing Shanann, Bella, Cece, and unborn baby Nico. Chris's desire was not extraordinary. It was ordinary in its beginning. Dissatisfaction, temptation, the dream of starting fresh. Many people feel those things, but most do not let them become justification for harm. What made Chris different was his willingness to let fantasy outweigh reality, to let the glow of a new romance blind him to the value of the life he already had. Nicole was part of that fantasy. She never asked him to kill, never conspired in his plan, but she represented the escape he craved. He imagined a world where he was free, where responsibilities vanished, where desire was unburdened by duty. In his mind, she was the promise of reinvention. But fantasies are fragile. They cannot carry the weight of children's laughter, bills to pay, or the honesty a marriage requires. When his 2 worlds collided, Chris made the most catastrophic choice possible. He destroyed reality to preserve the illusion. The story of Chris Watts is not only about murder. It is about the catastrophic cost of living 2 lives. A double life may feel thrilling, but it demands constant deceit. And deceit is a fire that eventually consumes everyone it touches. Chris tried to be 2 men, the father who smiled in videos with Bella and Cece, and the lover who texted Nicole about new beginnings. That contradiction was unsustainable, and its collapse came in blood and silence. The lesson reaches beyond this case. Everywhere, families are torn apart by lies, betrayals, and secret desires. Not every deception ends in tragedy as brutal as this one, but every deception carries damage. Trust breaks. Children suffer. Love corrodes. The Watts murders reveal the ultimate truth. No fantasy, no secret life, No temporary thrill is worth the destruction it leaves behind. The cost of Chris's bargain was felt by every life it touched. For Shanann, it was the loss of her future, her children, and the chance to see baby Nico take his first breath. For Bella and Cece, it was innocence stolen in their most vulnerable moment, their trust betrayed by the one man who should have protected them. For Nicole, it was exile and suspicion, a life lived under the shadow of a role she never imagined. And for Chris himself, the cost was not freedom, but permanent confinement. 5 life sentences, and the eternal replay of what he chose to do. What makes it haunting is how ordinary he appeared before the collapse. Neighbors saw him as quiet, co-workers as unremarkable, friends as reserved. Shanann posted videos of him playing with the girls, smiling for the camera. He looked like any other husband, any other father. But behind the stillness was a bargain already struck, one that would end with shallow graves and oil tanks. The contrast between the ordinary mask and the catastrophic truth is what unsettles us still. So the question now turns to you. What lessons do you take from this story? Could love, honesty, or intervention have changed its course? Was there a moment when Shanann's pleas might have reached him, or when Nicole's doubts might have shattered his illusion, or when neighbors' suspicions might have sounded the alarm sooner? Or was the bargain already sealed in his heart, the destruction inevitable from the moment he chose lies over truth? These questions will never have one answer, but they matter. They force us to look at our own lives, our own choices, our own temptations. Because this story is not only about a man's crime. It is about the cost of deception, the fragility of trust, and the danger of believing we can live 2 lives without consequence. Chris Watts's bargain was destruction, but Shanann's legacy is love. Her videos remain, her friends speak her name, her parents honor her memory. Bella's songs and Cece's energy live on in recordings that no crime can erase. Baby Nico is remembered in prayers and tributes, a reminder that even a life never lived can leave an indelible mark. And as the story closes, we are left with an image not of Chris, but of Shanann walking up the driveway on that final night, carrying her suitcase, unaware of the fate waiting inside. That doorbell camera captured her last steps, and with them, the final proof of what was real. The devil's bargain was his. But her legacy remains ours to remember. Shanann Watts, Bella Watts, Celeste Watts, and baby Nico. Their names deserve to be spoken with reverence, because they were more than the victims of a crime. Shanann was a devoted mother and fighter, determined to give her children joy despite her own struggles. Bella was gentle and sweet, a little girl who loved to sing. Cece was fiery and full of energy, a child whose hugs left no doubt of her love. And Nico was the promise of a future never lived, a son silenced before he ever took a breath. This story is not just about murder. It is about the fragile threads that hold families together, and how quickly those threads unravel when trust is broken. It is about the danger of secrets, the destruction that follows betrayal, and the unbearable cost of living 2 lives. Chris Watts chose deception over honesty, fantasy over reality, and in doing so, he annihilated everything that should have mattered most. The lesson is clear. No desire, no secret, no illusion is worth the destruction of love and trust. Families are not built on perfection, they are built on truth. And when truth is replaced by lies, the consequences are irreversible. As we close, we return to the last haunting image of Shanann, captured on a neighbor's doorbell camera, suitcase in hand, walking up to her front door for the final time. She could not know that inside that house, the threads of trust had already been severed, and that her love and devotion would soon be met with betrayal. That single image is the cost of one man's bargain, and it is the moment we must never forget. If this story moved you, honor Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and baby Nico by sharing this video, subscribing for more true crime documentaries, and telling us in the comments what part of their story shook you the most. Your voice helps ensure their names are remembered for how they lived, not just how they were lost. Because in the end, the story of Chris Watts is one of destruction, but the story of Shanann, Bella, Cece, and Nico is one of love, laughter, and innocence. And it is their legacy, not his crime, that we choose to carry forward.